Shorter closed session than we had last time we gathered.
Green? I call to order the committee of the whole board meeting at 6:32 p.m. in the boardroom of Oak Park Forest High School, and ask for a roll call, please.
Ms. Spivey. Dr. Moharaj. Mr. Arkin.
Here.
Mr. Henry.
Here.
Mr. Martieri.
Present.
Ms. Harris. Here. Mr. Tomsky.
Here. I move to enter closed session for the purpose of discussing the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the district or legal counsel for the district and independent contractors and specific volunteers, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee or against legal counsel for the district to determine its validity. However, a meeting to consider an increase in compensation to a specific employee of a public body that is subject to the local government wage increase Transparency Act may not be closed and shall be open to the public and posted and held in accordance with this act. Collective negotiating matters between the district and its employees or their representatives, or deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees. May I have a second?
Second.
And a roll call.
Mr. Arkin.
Yes.
Mr. Henry.
Yes.
Mr. Martieri.
Yes.
Ms. Harris. Yes. Mr. Tomsky.
Yes. So we're going to flip over to close. I'm,
Okay, we're live.
McKee, did you finish your work yet?
opening up my Zoom just to.
I saw your spreadsheet you sent me, or our spreadsheet you sent me.
Yeah.
We're live.
Ready? Yes, ready.
Gina, did you go out to talk about picking? Go out and talk about picking.
We're live.
Yeah, I'm just about.
It was good. It was a good conversation for kids. As long as she gets
Okay. All right, Ed, let's.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, we are reconvening open session, and the first order of business is public comment. Lisa, do we have public comment, please?
We have one public comment via Zoom.
Okay, and I just would like to state that please limit public comment to comments concerning matters within the jurisdiction of the Board of Education to 3 minutes, and this section is not intended to be a dialogue with the board. And the response to any questions will be in 2 weeks. So who do we have?
Our speaker for tonight is Mr. Mike Lewis Robinette.
Hello.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, so
Maybe-
thank you. My name is McLewis Robinet. My address is 214 South Elmwood. I'm a retired physicist from Argonne National Laboratory. I realize that the geothermal heating and cooling system is not on the agenda tonight, but I ask for an exception to make a short comment. I encourage you to fully embrace the geothermal option. If you plan to keep the high school building for more than the next 20 years, it is the best long-term solution. The loop field should last a century, and heat pumps will become cheaper and more efficient. Heat pumps coupled with ground loops have effective efficiencies 3 to 5 times greater than any gas boiler system, and you get heating and cooling. The concept of break even and payback time are probably not valid, but a geothermal system will pay for itself many times over. Your great-grandchildren will thank you. In addition to my own, there are many, maybe hundreds of geothermal systems installed in Oak Park, Unity Temple, Austin Garden, Pleasant Home, Carroll Center, Walgreens, Sugar Beet Building, Village Hall Council Chamber, Euclid Methodist. So it's a well-proven system. My primary point tonight is about the purchase of green energy. This is a critical issue that will impact how you address sustainability and decarbonization. It would take too long to present now, but I offer to share with you a critical perspective. I respectfully request that someone from the board contact me. Ms. Evans has my phone number, 708-848-3141, and my email address. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We have two comments to be written into the minutes, and that is all for tonight.
Okay, thank you. We are going to, well, we're just going to do a little bit of shifting in the schedule because of conflicts. So we will do the approval of the minutes, and then we're going to take instruction, which is item 6, and we're going to move that ahead of the finance items. So we're just going to flip 6 and 5. Okay, so with that said, I move to approve the August 11, 2022 committee of the whole minutes as presented. Are there any corrections, adjustments that need to be made? Okay, hearing none, do I have a second? Second. And we can do a voice vote for this. So all in favor? Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it, the motion carries. With that, we now move to our instructional item, which is the evaluation of freshman curriculum. And Dr. Johnson, we're going to.
Yes, so for this item, which we have been talking about for quite a while now, as the board knows, and we informed the board last spring we would bring in the fall for the board. We have two members of our team, Dr. Fiorgenza and Mr. Key, are here to give an overview of what you see in the packet and to answer any questions that you had. So I'll turn it over to them.
Good evening. So as you recall, last November, we came and shared the freshman curriculum restructuring plan, in which it contained the short-term and medium-term metrics that we would use in our complete evaluation process. We also shared long-term evaluation themes at that time. And then this past March, we shared the database prototypes that would also be used in our conversations to evaluate the freshman curriculum. Tonight, you see in the board packet our long-term evaluation targets and key data points, which you can see in the appendix that's the very end of the packet. These are all things we will use to evaluate the freshman curriculum based on our two long-term goals. The first is that we will continue to maintain the students' high levels of performance within the freshman curriculum. And second, we will ensure that the opportunity gap closes more significantly than had we not removed the college prep courses. Are there questions?
Ralph, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah. Oops. Thanks for the information. I love looking at the data. Obviously, the outcomes aren't where we want them to be, but I would assume the most recent data sets are all very much influenced by the pandemic, correct? And is that what you're finding? And so we won't really have a true read on the efficacy of some of these transitions for another couple of years. Is that fair, or am I missing something?
I would say that that is fair. There is an impact that is clearly evident from the pandemic year and a half. And I think it's fair to say that change does take more than 1 8-month school year. So for us to see significant impact, it's going to take more than 1 school year.
And just to follow up on that, I mean, what I've been reading in the national data is students, because of the challenges created by the pandemic and the educational environment around that, have struggled a little bit and lost anywhere between 1 to 3 years of where they would have been on an achievement basis. For a variety of reasons. Not, they're not all school-centric reasons, but for a variety of reasons. So that is what the data are showing. So once again, I caution reading too much into the current data, because I think the current data is not truly indicative of the programmatic change. I think the current data is more indicative of the environment that we are living in now, and students and faculty, frankly, adapting to that environment over the last 2 years. And I do think it'll take another couple of years to start actually having data sets where we could objectively evaluate any sort of longitudinal impact from these changes.
Right.
Go ahead, Greg.
I think that's a great point, Ralph. And I just want to add in something really quickly about that because I commented about it at a board meeting 2 board meetings ago about the advanced placement scores, the number of test takers that we've had. All the data actually doesn't here for this past school year play out the way that the kind of the national trend suggests. We certainly have some effects across the spectrum, but if you take a look at our advanced placement scores from this past school year, the percentage of students who scored it at 3 or higher were at 80%, which is, you know, the highest we've had over the past 5 years, 84%. So it's very close, and it's a significant increase from where we were the year before. And if you look at our Black or African American students, for example, this past school year, 66% of those students had a 3 or better on their AP, and that is the highest we've had over the past 4 years. And so again, your point is well taken. There is no, you know, grand conclusion that we can draw because of 1 year's worth of data, nor can we make any sort of grand claims about the effect of the pandemic on students learning and their path forward academically as a result of what we see here. But I think it's important just to point out the data as we come out of the pandemic. It's kind of a mixed bag of things, and we need to be cognizant of that. So Kristen, you're fine.
Yeah, I actually, you said what I was going to say mostly, but I think that the COVID is a variable, just and so we always have to consider it. And Dr. Fiorenza pointed out, can't remember if it was in our conversations or if it was in the report that, but these are the students that we have in front of us now, and so it's relevant data to consider. It is a variable. We don't really know how it will play out and how much time. Is it a year? Is it 2 years? Is it 3 years? But it's something that we will definitely be considering and trying to contextualize through that 5-year trend analysis. I think that's what's going to make it helpful. But you're absolutely correct that it's something we have to keep into consideration for a while.
That's a good question, and either one will answer. I'm just more curious about how come math is such a huge, it's like huge disparity to math and like English, or what do you call that? Just even do you understand why that is, or do you have an idea why that is, or how are we addressing that? That seems to be like a huge issue, especially for the Black students.
Absolutely. So we do notice it. The math team has noticed it. There have already been math conversations to really drill down and look at the math curriculum, the sequence, the tasks that we're asking students to do, how we're placing students coming from 8th grade into those freshman courses. And presentations are going to be forthcoming about some thoughts we have around our math curriculum. We do have a really good partnership now with 97. We met with them twice last year. Schools just gotten started, but we had plans to meet monthly this year to really look at the bridge between 8th grade and 9th grade. Maybe even some of how our more advanced students might be able to engage in some sort of peer tutoring with some of the 8th grade students, just to really bolster some of those skill sets. We're looking at maybe some summer school opportunities, kind of restructuring what that might look like and how that might benefit our students. So we are peeling back kind of all of the layers of our curriculum, but we're very well aware that we need to do something different to see something different.
And also to point out, so the way we've looked at the data is looking at how students perform against an expectation, and generally speaking for math, as the way that the expectation is met is most schools have less students meet in math than they do in reading. That's a general trend, right? Not to say it's not something we need to improve on, not to say that, you know, everything that Dr. Fiorenza just said is correct, but in terms of the benchmark, we presented last year on this during our State of the District, and it's just the way that the data is reported in Oak Park in many schools. They do have more students meet in reading than math, and I think it's just the way the benchmark has been calculated.
Yeah, if I could just jump in. So the national data tracks this as well, right? So there's a differential in student performance, even on the NAEP exams, that's statistically meaningful between language arts performance and mathematics performance. And part of the reason that the research has revealed for that is parents, guardians are better at supporting students on language arts than they are in math. So a lot of parents and guardians and others that are working with their students look at the math and say, yeah, good luck with that one, kid, because they can't really help out. So that's actually part of the reason why you see higher performance across the board, not just on NAEP, on the PISA exams, and internationally, this is a trend as well. So, and I appreciate the fact, Dr. Fiorenza, that you're looking at peer-to-peer mentoring. That's one of the highly effective evidence-based practices that actually moves the needle on mathematics performance in a statistically meaningful way. And it's very cost effective. I think our taxpayers would like to hear. It's something that has a huge bang for a very small buck, and it's all evidence-based. But this is a national trend, and it's something that is, I appreciate our administration's approach to addressing it, not just saying, well, these are the national numbers, but saying, how could we make our performance and our student achievement improved irrespective of what's happening nationally. So thank you for that. But I wanted to give Kabrib some of that context.
Gina?
I was just gonna say thank you for the reference to the transition from eight. It's making me think about the Kareem and I are both on the early childhood career, early childhood collaborative, and because math and the way number sense and all of those things stem from that really early age, I'm curious about the conversations even with D97 around and D90 around third, fourth, and fifth grade, as well as to the middle school years and matriculation efforts that you all are making. So I look forward to hearing more about that.
Yeah, thank you.
Good.
Yeah, I've got a couple comments that we're trying to organize them in my people brain. I appreciate all the work that you guys have done, okay? And I know that our kids, all kids have experienced some kind of effect from the pandemic, all right? And it shows up in the data. We know that. My concern is this: we're embarking on a never before tried, all right, curriculum change, without question. And I've spoken about this before. It is the need to know and evaluate on the fly how things are looking. All right, and so I understand the long-term data points and comparisons in that. My concern is more on the short term. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I'll give an analogy story that years ago I had my own business. I owned 4 stores, and at the end of the day, each of the managers of each store would report into me 4 numbers. Okay, and of those 4 numbers, I knew exactly how we performed using those 4 numbers, whether it was sales, cost of goods, payroll, mm-hmm. and whether we have safety accident. And so I knew if we're making money, I know if we're being successful. And that's kind of the thing that I've been looking for, is we know where our kids walk in the classrooms today. Okay. Mm-hmm. And we talked about mastery and mastering the materials, and that's what we want them to do throughout the course of the school year. And I am focused right now on the freshman curriculum. And so what can we look at as we go through a school to know what are those 2, 3, 4 metrics that we can be looking at that will change over the course of the school year. That we know, things that pop into my mind, whether, what kind of effects will maybe it's attendances, maybe there's some behavior issues that had to do with it. Obviously, how many assignments have been turned in or missing things. I don't know. I'm not a professional educator, all right? But what are those things that you could look at, all right, and say, hey, this we're moving in the right direction. All right, or saying, hey, we got a problem. All right, and we're gonna have to figure out how to, turn left and make it around the curve. Whatever. And that's kind of that's really, I don't want to wait 3 years down the road to know whether we're working.
Of course.
Okay, I want to know by November, how's it going?
Yeah.
All right, how is this group of freshmen with this first experience, how's it work? All right, I know it's preliminary, I know it's, all right, and that's kind of where I'm at with it. I mean, we've got the baseline with benchmarking, we know it really doesn't matter what's happened in the past, because we got to deal with what the students that are in our building right now. And we got to bring them from point A to point B. Okay, and pandemic, it doesn't, it is what it is. We got to deal with it with the here and now. And so that's really what my questions and my concerns were.
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective. And I'm sure that there are community members, parents that are asking themselves the same questions. I think there's some realness to what we've embarked on by having our freshman restructured curriculum opportunity. And that is that the progress and the process of learning is not just linear. It's not point A to point B, a straight line.
No, I understand
There's
that.
ups, downs. So to week by week, day by day, that really is the classroom teacher who is monitoring grades, attendance, students' affect, discipline, executive functioning, mastery of skills. That's really their domain, week to week, to adjust, day to day, to adjust, shift, to help get kids from growth point to growth point, right? And what I look like week 1 might not be what I look like week 2. So we have to be really careful that we aren't trying to define too quickly whether or not all of our freshman students are being successful based on 1 or 2 short-term things that could change in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a quarter. So that really is the role of the teacher. So they're doing this daily. They weekly meet with their teams. They look at formative and summative assessment data to make those decisions and determinations. The administrative team meets weekly with all of the division heads to talk about, are there any concerns you're seeing? Is there anything we need to be aware of, barriers, things you're running up against that we need to help take care of to ensure that success continues, that growth continues? I think it's reasonable that by November, there can be some conversation around what's the freshman student's experience. What is that looking like from the teacher's perspective, the student's perspective? What is that looking like around skill mastery? I think that's reasonable to give a general, here's where things are. But to be able to say by November, we're successful or we're moving in the right direction, there are so many variables that I think we just need to be very careful that we don't send a message that we're going to be able to decide by November whether or not.
No, I'm not asking for the decision. Okay. What I'm asking is a work in process report.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to give just a general, here's kind of where we are.
Okay, thank
you. Actually, my question, I have a few questions that are somewhat redundant, so be quick. I agree with Fred's question in terms of just that pulse of of getting a sense, because this is not a change, but, you know, there needs to be, you know, we saw some great successes, we saw some problem areas, that if there's not some sense of that, then we're just marching blindly. So that need for feedback, and I'm a more of a, you know, quantitative, but that's more of a qualitative piece, so I can stomach that one, okay?
Absolutely.
For where we are in the process.
Yep.
Okay, so I echo that. The other question I just wanted to flip back to something that was stated earlier, because it's different than what my memory is, which is not always going to win here on math, because I appreciate the dialogue on the math, and you know, it has been brought up by the board on numerous occasions, and I think the reason it's been brought up, at least from my perspective, is that you know, what I'm hearing is that, you know, the national or whatever, from my memory, that our performance in math as a district relative to our peers in the state, we perform better in language versus the state than we do in math versus the state. Am I mistaken, or? And you can.
I don't have my data right in front of me, which I don't like to talk about data without in front of me, but I last year, our cohort that we're in of schools, which is like hundreds of schools, we looked at the data. And so the cohort of academic, the curriculum and assessment people, and Oak Park did for math is doing better than most schools in the state. It's just that the benchmark isn't as high. So our performance is relative to our peers in the state. And I can get that to you from the district from last year. And so I don't want to speak exactly, isn't as, it's not below necessarily. It's just that the benchmark, the percent of students who meet necessarily on the exam wasn't as high as the rating. So I'll double check that for you.
Okay, thank you.
But,
and more importantly is what the fact that we're going to be seeing something, because it has been a recurring discussion. My last topic, and I'm just trying to, you know, frame it in question form, because this is a new curriculum, and you know, so this year we have the single track, we'll call it, okay, and then sophomore, junior, and senior years, it's back to people are placed where they belong based on what they've demonstrated, et cetera, correct?
So it's our hope that in sophomore, junior, senior year, students choose to take those more rigorous honors courses, but a college prep course is available at the sophomore, junior, and senior level.
Okay, so, which is good, so that it is this, so with that said, what I'm interested in is how, when we look at data, because this is a cohort that we're gonna, so I mean, a lot of the data we get is not, we get data that's cohort based and data that's not cohort based.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So can you just talk to how we're gonna get cohort data and my, you know, to really focus on this class and then
Yes.
next year get the following class?
Yes. So Ms. McKee and I have already had conversations with data systems about creating data dashboards that allow us to cohort this group of ninth graders and monitor them until they graduate. So we really have to be able to see how they progress, how they do, what choices they make in the next 3 years. So we just create that. I don't want to make it sound like it's super easy, but I'm not a data expert, so it's easy to me. We just create a pivot table and we create a dashboard and we watch them over the next 3 years. Pivot tables are my favorite now. I love a pivot table. So we'll watch them.
You know, and actually, thanks for that. I wanted to say quickly too, what you're talking about tracking cohorts. And the previous information you gave, Dr. Fiorenza, about an answer to Board Member Arkin's question about short-term and medium-term goals. While you contextualize that in a very kind of broad, thorough way for a quick snapshot of really what you're referring to for an answer to both those questions, you can look at the table at the very end of the report that speaks to short-term monitoring, medium-term monitoring. It talks to those types of things that we want to be doing during the year. Those things we're talking about doing between semesters.
Correct.
For medium term, and then of course those longer term items. And while not all of those presume cohort specific monitoring, it's implicit in several of them. For example, when you take a look at the enrollment patterns that we're going to be tracking from freshman to sophomore year and beyond, that has to be done in a cohort model. So these are things that, you know, we're not just responding to here in a moment, they're baked into the report that we have here. So
I just had one last comment statement. So thank you for all the information. Appreciate that. And as we're doing this new venture, I'd like to be cut to the teachers that are taking on this tall order, this tall task. So I don't know if we need to hear from them as a group or however it is, just how they're feeling, how they're doing, more resources. I'd like to really know if it's too much or if we need additional resources or what have you, because it's a tall order. And in terms of performing, we're expecting a lot more teachers to make sure we're aware of that. And don't forget that they're involved in this process. It's a very important part of this process.
Absolutely. Every Monday, actually, Monday, we meet with the division heads, and they have been very forthcoming about where the teachers are in the process. And just to be very honest, the teachers in the fourth week, they are tired. They have been working very hard. They have been collaborating a lot. They have some common collaboration time plus their PCT time. They're sharing a lot of work. They're working a lot one-on-one with students. I mean, when I was here this morning at 7, kids were sitting outside of rooms waiting for the teacher who was coming down the hall. Our teachers are working really hard. And so we've made a commitment at the administrative level, whatever we can take off the plate that is not immediate, not urgent, something we can do for them, we need to do that so that they, and that really goes for all of our teachers, but especially right now, our freshman teachers, but they are working very hard.
Yeah, that's like, if there is something that you need to bring to the board or we can do to help, please bring it. Without our teachers, they don't really have a school, right?
Absolutely.
So it's, I remember having this conversation last year, and Marion brought it up, is make sure we're supporting the teachers. So I don't want us to lose sight of that as we're going for the school year. The numbers matter, of course, but teachers matter as well because they're doing all the hard work. So
Really appreciate that.
Yeah, so I guess we've talked like sometime November or thereabouts, kind of how we should clearly include, you know, what it looks like to our teachers and what it looks like to our students.
Yes.
Thank you.
I just want to add one comment because I would be remiss to in any way make the board think that I or student learning was driving any kind of math. The math teachers are really aware of the math data and are very passionate about their content. So I just want to make sure I give them the kudos. They have been having conversation on their own about things that they want to change and want to do relative to the math curriculum, the math rigor. So I just want to make sure I put that out there so it doesn't come off that admin is doing this. These teachers are very thorough and it matters to them. So I just want to make sure I say that.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. So we will now return to the finance section. And our first topic will be sustainable energy use and decarbonization.
all right, we have hybrid presenters for this one. We have in-house Executive Director of Operations Ron Anderson. We also have the news here from FGMA. Steve. And online we have Allison Sternquist, and other members of the team to help with the information. And this is probably a topic that, at least for me at this point, means very little introduction. We talked about it now for, this is the third board meeting in a row. And so just to kind of put a fine point on it, this is in this can be the whole meeting, we're having a discussion about geothermal with the hope that at the special meeting precede or after this meeting, we will be able to present to you all a decision for voting. So with that said, let's turn it over to I believe Ron, you're kicking it off. Is that right?
Yes,
Yes.
I was making sure the other panelist, he was inside of the chat, made attendees instead of the board meeting.
Oh, I see.
Now he's in.
All right.
Okay. So by coincidence, last board meeting, right before the board meeting, we reached out to Tom Basadilli, and he referred us to database, and they were able to review everything that we submitted on August 25th and come up with an overview that he put on top of what we presented so that the board will see the difference after his evaluation of what we presented. I have Joe on the line. His name is Joe Claire with database.
Yes, I'm here.
Can we pull up the presentation? Or do you want me to pull it up?
Want me to pull it up? Okay. What's the name on it? There's a lot of
Presentation.
other one that said, okay,
Unless I can share.
I see it. Track and field presentation.
Yes.
Okay.
Scroll to the next.
All right. So thank you, Ron. As Ron mentioned, my name is Joe Claire. I'm a principal with the firm DBHMS, heading up a group called Database Plus, which is a high-performance building design studio focused on human health outcomes. And one of the topics that we cover a lot is electrification and in high-performance buildings. And so with the recommendation of Tom, we came in to provide a quick assessment of some of the numbers and the approach to Project 2 in the context of the larger commitments that both the village and the school district have made to carbon reduction. And so we did start with the three options that were presented and noted a couple of things early on that the approach to the project is looking at a horizontal geothermal field as one of its options. And we compare that to the option of a vertical geothermal field, which has which can have more capacity in it. But the horizontal field is in some ways is quicker to install. And obviously that comes into play when we start looking at the track and field project. And then we noted that the original assessment, although correct, it had some trouble putting into context what the effect of greenhouse gas emissions would be by going with the conventional option. So if we can advance the slides, we'll talk a little bit more about the assessment that we made on this. So I think we can advance a couple of more slides up. We just kept these in here for context on the options that were included, including the solar production, which we'll get into. And then, the high level summary of those is the same. We did want to take one step back and look at the district's pathway to electrification. You have goals for both a 40% reduction and then a full reduction. There is a pretty straightforward pathway to making this work. And that is first and foremost through lowering system demand. The second is the installation of some form of heat pump technology to handle both the heating and cooling loads in the building. Right now, You are primarily driven a lot in energy source. About half of the energy total goes towards heating or heating hot water. And so that is a key piece to understand. And so that's part of why the options that are presented are there. But the path isn't, it isn't an either or, but there really is on a project by project basis, some deliberation that needs to be made on that. And so we did take a look at that piece of the options that were presented and how those come into play. There, depending on which way those go, there is some upgrade work that needs to happen. A lot of colleges right now are moving away from their larger district plants that are natural gas based. And one of the complications they're finding is that they often have to kind of make that work coincide with work that they're doing inside of buildings and replacing air handling units. And then once you've done those 3 steps, then the last step is the renewable energy piece, which is part of what gets to some short-term goals. One of the benefits that we have here in Illinois is that with the passage of CEJA last year, we can count on our electric grid getting close to or at 0 by 2045, which means that any building that's electrified by 2045 should at that point have achieved the carbon reductions that they're looking for. So that is a step that, it needs to be considered, and not every building, and Oak Park and River Forest High School is one of them, has the capacity to provide all of its electricity on site. So having a clean grid is definitely a piece of this. So we advance to the next slide. The 3 questions that we looked at in the short time frame we had from the last discussion is, what is the most cost-effective approach to electrification for Oak Park and River Forest High School as a whole? So we didn't have enough time to look at the specifics of Project 2 on its own. We had a modeling pathway to look at the school in total, which would absorb and include the work that was going on in Project 2. With that answer on what's the right way for the whole, what does that say about what the right approach is now, specifically looking at Project 2? And then how does that approach to Project 2 affect the ability of the district to meet its future commitments? So the next slide, we start to look at what the current profile is of the building, the total heating capacity and the total cooling capacity in the building, as well as the energy use. And if you advance to the next slide, going to our first step, that energy use of the building right now puts the school above the 75th percentile. So those who were not aware of the status of the school in terms of where it ranks in very much in the top in terms of energy use per square foot for the building. That is certainly bodes well and represents well the way that the school and the board and the facility staff have been caretakers of tax dollars. But it also means that the opportunities for energy reduction get smaller and smaller. And so really a focus on the plant is where the real significant work towards electrification is going to be for the district, both to meet the near term and the long term goal. And so if we can advance to the next slide, we start to look at some of the options at a plant level. So we have the current option, the current plants, which are existing boiler plants and chillers. As a kind of a business as usual, just as a comparison, you could over time just upgrade those to high efficiency boilers and high efficiency chillers and keep the same setup. That would not allow you to meet your carbon goals and your climate reduction goals. But that kind of forms a little bit of the baseline of what work could happen. The next one is an electrification path that goes through ground source heat pumps with some supplemental heating and cooling that make sure that it can serve all the existing terminal equipment. That would be a water source heat pump approach. And then the electrification B option is to use air to water heat pumps or air source heat pumps directly in the school building and with some supplemental heating where is needed based on the terminal equipment. Right now, the air to water portion of that is only really able to deliver a certain temperature of water and works well in surface water heating. But that technology is being developed for commercial use on the heating side, the thermal comfort side. But the air source heating is direct air source heating is something that's available. Air to air heat pumps is available and is something that can be looked at for the project. And when we get later in, one of the options that we did consider and looked at was, in addition to the 3 options presented previously, was a straight air source option and how that would affect both the energy usage as well as the potential for electrification and carbon reduction. So if we can move to the next slide, This is just a little bit of a summary of where this gets us. So using the current rates that the school pays or that the district pays for natural gas and electricity, right now you're looking at about a 68 cent per square foot total utility cost. So somewhere in the neighborhood, a little over $600,000. If you were just to upgrade your boilers and chillers to higher efficiency over that period of time at the same rates as today, you would lower the overall energy use a little bit, and you would bring it down to 63 cents square foot. If you go with an electrification option A with the ground source heat pump chiller and some supplemental heating and cooling, you would bring that up to about 65 cents a square foot. So still less than you're paying now, but a little bit more than if you just did a straight, continued using natural gas and did a straight conversion or straight upgrades. And then the electrification B option of going air to water heat pumps or air source total, that would raise, those systems are less efficient than air to water source, or the ground source, which is why ground source has a benefit. And so that would result in an increase, barring any other sort of energy efficiency improvement, would increase to about 75 cents a square foot. So one thing to note though, and this was reviewed with the people who work on the gas purchasing for the district, is that right now the rates that you got in the last procurement are excellent. The staff really did, and the staff and your suppliers and your negotiators did a great job getting a good rate through June of 2024. That's well below the market rate. And it really makes the balance between natural gas and electricity. If you compare them on a per energy use basis or per energy unit basis, it's about 5 to 1 in terms of electricity cost for natural gas, which is just a little bit more than the efficiency of a ground source system, which is around 4 to 4.5 to 1 units of electrical energy input for energy moved. And so that's why those numbers get close, but not quite equal if we look at the electrification option A. If we, however, look at the balance that is prevalent in most of the marketplace, we generally see somewhere between a 3 to 1 to 4 to 1 ratio between electricity and natural gas. And if we look right now at what is we've included the chart over there, which is kind of a historical trend chart of the natural gas price in Illinois in the all-in basis, which includes both the supply and distribution. You can see that over recent years, it's been hovering in the $9 to $10 per or 90 cent to $1 per therm level. And so if we look at that, if we look at kind of what the district might expect going forward, if we were to look at doing, when you do a procurement in 2024, and again, this is all complete conjecture. There's no way anybody has a complete sense of where the market will be at that time, but we can use both the trend and the existing marketplace as a little bit of an indicator. And then we go to the next slide. If we take those numbers and do the same comparison, we move to a point where we look at about 77 cents a square foot for your business as usual option. We actually look at a lower cost, about 67 cents per square foot for the ground source, and then again back up to about 77 cents a square foot for the air to water or air to air source heat pump. So the electrification options at those current rates, if you go through a water source system, you save about 5% against existing, and it does put you on a path to meet your village and district carbon targets. If you look at an air source, you do add utility cost. And so it does put the district, still puts the district on a path, but it does increase costs in doing so. If you look at your future rates, not your future rates, but what future rates are likely to be. And again, I always say that with a grain of salt, even with a forward ahead purchasing, you don't know until you actually get to the market, and that you won't know for another 2 years or a year and a half when you go back out to the market. But you can save somewhere between 20 and 10% versus your current expenditure levels by going to either the ground source, water source, or the air source. And then any project that can pursue water source heat pumps connected to ground source should do so. from just the point of view of ongoing utility budgets. Obviously, there is a cost benefit that needs to get played into that because there is an upfront cost for it. But just from the pure operating energy and electrification and decarbonization, it is the most efficient and operating cost effective way to do that. So system options right now, we did not include an electric resistant option in this part of the analysis, partly because it had already been put in place for the original analysis in terms of what was option 3. But in our climate zone, going to pure electric resistance is not really an option. And we did discuss this, with the team, and that obviously presents kind of a conservative worst case scenario of what you would do to electrify. But there is much more likely a hybrid solution that uses a combination of air source heat pumps and some form of electric resistance only where specifically necessary, depending on the use of the building and depending on the systems that are in the building. So if we go to the next slide, this is where I start to look at the analysis of the water source that was presented, the option for going for a horizontal. Just looking at the capacity of the various land areas that could be turned into geothermal well fields, the future track area and what is currently the baseball softball fields and the football field present the largest continuous area. And if you note, your total heating capacity of the building is about 3,500 tons of heating. And those two areas combined get you to that number. And actually about 4,000 tons of capacity, which would leave you, a good cushion of opportunity in a perfect world and in a perfect scenario. The next largest continuous area is the South Field, which gets you about 1,500 tons, which gets you somewhere, less than half, but still a reasonable portion of the existing load. With the project that's being presented, we do know that the track, so if we go to, I believe, to the next slide and look at the horizontal system, between the track and the football field on a horizontal system, we get a much lower capacity, about 500 tons. But the situation here is that with the time frame that is needed to get the track online by the due date for that track project, the horizontal field is really the only option. There is not a capacity within the current marketplace to deliver all the wells that are needed that could be put under the track in the timeframe that the track project needs to be done. That market is building, and so in a year and 2 years, that capacity may grow enough to make it happen, but there just isn't the capacity in the marketplace. But what that does mean is that you're basically using 500 tons of cooling and heating capacity in an area that could at some point held as much as 4,000 tons. So it is a bad consequence or a negative consequence, but it is one that obviously has to be balanced off against the other priorities for both the project and the school. So if you look at the next slide, which kind of has a summary of these, we look at what the kind of the energy savings pieces and also look at the greenhouse gas emissions. If we look at just today's electric grid, and if we look at not yet having added renewable energy, if we just look at the electrification. So our grid is not yet clean. So that means that from a electrification point of view, we still have to deal with some clean or not clean energy issues. But the business as usual option will keep you at about 350 metric tons of carbon emissions per year. On project 2, about 280. So there'll be about a 20% reduction immediately if you go to the electrification option A. And electrification option B for air source has about a 10% reduction, but it's not as much as the option A because there is just that much more electricity use and total energy use. So kind of a summary of the vertical versus horizontal piece with this in mind. Is that the future track area has enough capacity, but the schedule limitations will kind of negate that opportunity. Because of the scale and complexity, those other areas, so like the South Fields and some of the other areas, will be a little bit more costly than the prices that you're getting now for the existing field. So just as a planning piece, that is something to be aware of. I will note that the analysis and the recent passage of the Inflation Reduction Act has put in place both an increased incentive for for geothermal installations, as well as one that is in place for 12 years. So this will not expire as of right now until 2034. And additionally, they have made it not just a tax credit, but to nonprofit entities, they have made it a refundable payment. So the school district, and I know that the village has also made you aware that the nonprofit entities can tap into that incentive. So there is additional funding to help offset that piece of it. I think it's also worth mentioning before, even as we go on to renewable energy, I'll mention it a little bit later too, but both geothermal and renewable energy can be purchased using energy as a service or energy performance contracts. So they will not always require, and those entities can also take advantage of either the tax credit savings or the refundable taxes, depending on how you structure the deal. One quick look at renewable energy. There are two main assets on the site that have the ability to have renewable energy added to them. There is the combination of what is going to be the Project 2 footprint and the 67 building. And that has a capacity for about 700 kilowatts of solar on it, generating, depending on the efficiency, near a million or near 1,000 megawatt hours or 1,000,000 kilowatt hours. And then you have the parking garage, which has a capacity to do as much as 800 megawatt hours. And with the current usage at about 5,200 megawatt hours, and even increasing a little bit slightly when you start, or changing slightly when we look at the electrification options, that's still only about a third of your existing electricity use. And even if you were to make some minor reductions and get your energy efficiency down even a little bit more, given how efficient you are now, we can't expect that number to change. So you're looking at maybe about a third of your future usage that can be covered with renewable energy on site. So if we go to the next slide, that just summarizes that here, you're still going to need some level of offsite energy generation or energy contract. So whether that's clean energy purchase, or if you're just going to wait for the grid to clean, this depends on kind of the overall approach you take to meeting that 40% target, some of which a good chunk of it will be able to be reached through the Project 2. But whatever additional needs to be done, that would be something you need to look at as a combination of renewable energy or offsite purchase. And I did note on here, kind of the difference in cost of that offsite energy in terms of the amount that you'd have to purchase to be able to offset. So if you did just a business as usual upgrade, and note that that still doesn't get you to zero, this kind of trade-off is not really seen as reduction in carbon footprint, but it does make for a financial comparison to see how much you would have to spend on your offset energy compared to what you would have to spend for the two electrifications options. So there's a sizable savings in terms of how much energy would need to be purchased, how much would need to be purchased either through renewable energy credits or offsite PPAs in order to make that work. And so from the renewable energy piece of it, there's not enough on the site to handle all of it. So there will be a combination of either community solar or virtual power purchase. The cost of building mounted solar because it doesn't rely on the transmission cost, and so it doesn't have the same rates with ComEd that purchasing from offsite does. It is generally the less per kilowatt hour option, especially for an entity that's going to have that working over the full life of the solar panels. Community solar and PPAs, though, are a great way to make up the difference, and meaning that being able to reduce the carbon intensity of your energy use. The efficiency of a solar plus heat pump for hot water generation has recently passed the efficiency of solar thermal. And so I think the takeaway from that is that the original options looked at using solar thermal or solar PV or some combination thereof. I think that is something we would recommend to be evaluated as the project move forward to really get into the specifics, because there are some very project specific elements that we could not get into time-wise between when we were able to come on board and make the assessment. But it's not as easy a slam dunk as it was 4 or 5 years ago, where solar thermal was definitely more efficient and definitely more cost effective. The changing in the marketplace from both the heat pump technology and its efficiencies, as well as the solar PV technology and its efficiencies, has changed that game. And so from a variety of reasons, including the flexibility of being able to use the solar generated from multiple systems, and the like is one of the things we would recommend, giving that a hard look, and maybe revising some of the options that get looked at as the project 2 moves forward. And so for the next slide, some of the recommendations, ground source, we do recommend pursuing, and even if it is going to be the horizontal field, we still think that that is the best overall option. For the track replacement, we do recognize that as kind of the first slide alluded to, the costs that we're seeing right now. And again, this is all early stage, so there's always going to be a lot of risk pricing and early stage pricing, but that cost should come in about 15% lower. We would expect somewhere closer to $7,500 a ton. And we would also recommend that the Project 2 team look at trying to match the capacity of the building or the load of the building to that 500 tons to the greatest extent it possibly can, so that the project takes the best benefit of that and there's less supplemental heat that's needed in the building. We would recommend that all the future electrification look at replacement of the boiler plants through maybe energy as a service. That might be a way to make the district's bond dollars go further, and tap into the ability to use the operating funds and energy performance contracting mechanisms available to school districts. As a former school district official myself, serving for several years at Chicago Public Schools as the managing engineer, I know that produces some complications with debt and what the district has. And so it's not a clean and easy thing to do, but it is something worth looking at. And that market has matured, and those entities are also able to tap into both the efficiency of doing the work, as well as the maximize the incentives. And those entities have gotten better over the years. For those who may have been burned by previous performance contracts, both in performance and maybe the clashing that might have happened between performance contractors and school staff or school regular contractors and designers, that has improved significantly over the years. So having seen both sides of that, I wouldn't hesitate to make the recommendation that that's a way to look at how to do the future projects. And I do think that there's some future studies should be done on the South Field, and maybe some harder looks at what it would take to get under Lake Street, for that to be able to serve the existing building. I may sound a little bit like a job hopper, but I did spend also a couple of years working at Illinois Institute of Technology, and they have several plants that cover the whole campus, and major infrastructure does go under State Street. So it is viable and possible, but it is something that doesn't come without its complications. But as your next largest source of ground source, and something that may be able to take, again, you take 500 tons off using the Project 2, you take another 1,500 tons off using the South Field, and you start to get to a point where you have less to rely on, maybe a little less efficient air source heating systems that you would need to do a full electrification eventually of getting this building to meet the climate goals.
And not to mention the South Field would only be done in 10 years after it's time to resurface the South Field.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. With all of these, anytime you're doing geothermal, it can only make sense to do it when you're doing a full renovation, which is why now with the track project happening is a great time to make the deliberation, make the decision, because your next opportunity won't be until you redo the track again, in whatever time frame that is. So we would absolutely recommend that whatever that boiler project and the South Field project would all align with when you were, both the combination of the boiler plant age as well as South Field, so that you get the maximum out of the investments you've already made.
Ron, this is Allison. I'd like to just say a few words about tying this all together with what we had presented in the past. And I want to say that working with Joe has been fantastic these last 2 weeks. I think he's brought a lot to the table, and really appreciate the insight that he has given. There were a couple of things that, as we worked together, came to the forefront. Apologize. One of them being that there was the comment at the last meeting, and that Joe touched on, about expecting a slightly less cost than what was in there for the geothermal fields. And I think that in talking to Joe, I'm feeling much more comfortable with the numbers that we had, in that his estimation of 10 to 15%, them being 10 to 15% high, is very much in line with what was built into those numbers was a 10 to 15% design contingency that would drop out at bidding if it wasn't necessary. And that is in there because it's a safety factor that we built in because we know that we haven't begun the actual design work yet. So his statement actually really aligned with where I feel we're at, and I'm hopeful that we can get to that 10 to 15% less. So I thought that was worth noting to the board. The full electrification and use of electric boilers versus air source heat pumps was something that we discussed at length with Joe and with AMSCO and Steve Bremer, the mechanical engineer that has been working on your building for many years now. Talked at length with Joe and is available now. And initially, there's a couple things to note about that. Why we initially put forward just electric resistance boilers was for two reasons. And I completely agree with Joe that we can work to look for a hybrid. This type of spaces that we have and the amount of outside air that's necessary for the spaces in Project 2. And Steve can get into the details if we need to. The air source heat pumps don't work as well for those particular spaces. And so that's where we got talking about a hybrid approach. The other factor in that is that we are looking to use the roof for solar, and we are also looking to use the roof to have a green roof, which will help with rainwater infiltration, which based on the makeup of the site is something that we actually kind of need. So if we were to go to purely air source heat pumps for Project 2, it would hinder us on both of those fronts with regard to solar, because we would need more mechanical equipment on the roof. So that's where we agree with Joe that we could certainly find some more efficient, if the district did not do geothermal and went option 3, we can and would absolutely look with them to see what we can do to come up with some sort of a hybrid that would best serve the needs of Project 2. But from an overall building perspective, we don't disagree with him that the air source heat pumps are better in general. It's just the types of spaces in Project 2 that make it a little bit harder to do purely air source heat pumps. And then the cost of natural gas, when he shared what the general market is versus what the district is looking at, most of our analyses had been based on what the district is currently paying, and it obviously paints a bit different picture, which improves the case for going geothermal when you look at the 90 cents per therm. So I think that those are the main items that I wanted to touch on and share as a follow-up based on comments and to tie it together with previous presentations. So Ron, is there anything else you feel we should add?
No, I said just the next steps.
Right. So if you can go to the next step slide. So we had talked about that with the timeframes of decision making that need to be made on the track and field, that the district will need to give a direction on how we should proceed with regard to whether or not to generate bid documents for geothermal for the track and field project. And if you do not choose to go with geothermal, then we issue at the end of next week, we send out to the estimator the schematic design documents for Project 2. And if you choose not to do geothermal, we would need to know if you want us to include option 1 or option 3 in the bid documents if it's not geothermal. And then the timeline, that last slide had also included a timeline of future.
To the bottom of the memo.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like 27 of the presentation.
Right.
Right, okay.
And actually, as we go through, I know we mentioned really quickly on the memo, one thing I did want to bring up is that if you do look at electrifying project 2 and going through one of those options, and depending on how much renewable energy, both from on-site installation as well as through a community solar purchase, once it's electrified, because of the imbalance, how much energy the project 2 uses use relative to the other uses in the school, you will get close to the 40% commitment that you've made just through the work that's being done in project 2. So if you kind of slide back up, if whoever's controlling Edward, if you can slide back up through the memo to that bigger, it's like right there. Yeah, that summary. So your net reduction on project 2 with going to geothermal gets you about a 4% reduction against the overall total greenhouse gas emissions of the current school. If you do renewable energy, you get a 16% reduction. And that's just allotting a small portion of the renewable energy. If you basically full electrify and, through either clean grid purchase or when the grid is clean in 2045, that your reduction just from project 2 is about 36% of your greenhouse gas emissions, which gets you really close to that 40% goal, the first 40% goal. So this gets you a long way towards both that first commitment and then eventually to the longer term commitment, both depending, both of them depend a little bit on all the details of how you get there and how much of the renewable energy goes in now versus goes in later. But this just gives you kind of an encapsulation of that. And I know some questions had come up over the weekend about that. So we wanted to make sure we made that clear.
Any questions?
Maybe not.
Fred, you ready?
Sort of. It's a lot to take in. And I know it's been an incredible amount of work to do over a very short period of time for us. And I appreciate that from everybody. So thank you all. I guess my question has to do with, last meeting, we kind of dismissed vertical in its entirety. But it seems that, and correct me if I'm wrong, the reason it's a timing issue right now with vertical, that there's not enough suppliers in the marketplace for us to be able to get it done on time. Is that my take? That's my take on it.
Yeah, and I think that in talking at length with Nicole, the amount of time that the district can afford to be without the fields is always going to be a factor. And that's it's the impact on the sports programs is the big limiting factor.
I understand that, and I agree with Nicole. However, the amount of production, it seems to be dramatically higher with vertical than with horizontal. So my first question is kind of, what is that time delay? I mean, what would be our investment in time, all right, to go to utilize vertical rather than horizontal?
So the information that we were given by the guy from Geothermal Inc. who does this is that he can drill 1 well per day per rig. Right now, he could probably get 3 rigs at a time out there. He can't promise when, like that's where the supply concern comes in. But that basically, if you were able to get 3 rigs out there working all at the same time, you could drill 15 wells a week. And Joe, how many wells were you looking at in order to achieve that output that you were talking about?
Yeah, it was near 1,000 wells.
So at 15 a week, 1,000 divided by 15, it's a long time.
That's the precise number. That's my type of math.
Can I just on that quick? Can I ask a related question, because you're exactly where I'm at, which is because my understanding and the presentation was very helpful, The number I come away is 8 to 1, which is that there's 8 times more capacity in vertical than horizontal.
Yes.
And with horizontal, we're able to meet just 64% of the needs. And I know you talked about sizing the project to fit it, but we're not meeting that nearly what our capacity is. Is that correct?
You're meeting 100% of the cooling needs, 64% of the heating needs.
Which means you need, other stuff. So with that said, I kind of was at the same bus stop as Fred was for this one, which is, is there a hybrid? Is there some other way? Does it have to be all vertical and not hard? I mean, is there some way to get more capacity, which is what vertical offers?
I think that what you're going to see is that the amount of time you have to drill wells, again, getting 15 to maybe 18, if you were to be able to run a rig 6 days a week, the amount of wells you'd be able to get in the time frame you have is probably not going to get you much more than the 500 tons that you're getting out of the horizontal field. So it really becomes, that's where the time constraint really becomes a limiting factor. And again, once you do the track, you're not going to lift that field up for another 20 to 25 years, depending on the condition and the quality and the use. So it's a little bit of a hard, being trapped between a rock and a hard place. But yes, you're losing capacity on it. But right now there just doesn't seem to be the market for it. And once you put the horizontal field in, you're taking up all the space that you could to eventually dig vertical wells. You're going to leave that horizontal field in for its 50 to 70 years of usefulness.
So kind of on the same subject, moving the ball down the field a little bit. As we go forward with other projects, will it become more feasible to do vertical wells? For example, this is a lot of this is predicated on project 2, and so if we go forward with project 2 and we raise the southeast side of the building, would we then be able to utilize, during that construction period, to put in vertical wells? All right, in that space. And we've got we've got other spaces too that I can just see us throwing them in when and where we can. Where it's you've got areas on in the garage.
Agreed. Yep.
But we also have that alley. We have all of the mall area. Got obviously the south fields. We've got areas in front of the school. I'm just trying to figure out what space we could utilize. Can this be done over time? I guess
it can. And to answer your first question, that the market will increase capacity. The incentives that are in place now are absolutely going to drive more production of rigs. It's going to drive more contractors to be able to do this. This is something that's only an increase. Again, the incentive is in place between now and 2034. So over this next 12 years, there's going to be nothing but a continual increase, especially given the way that it works, specifically in our marketplace. It's already here. It's already working for buildings. So we do expect that to improve. So you're correct. You will have the opportunity on these other assets that you have to consider that and to add to your ability to do it.
And Joe, can you actually talk to, we actually talked for a little bit, you and I, about the potential to put geothermal below project 2 or below a building. And can you talk about the pros and cons of that? And I know it's not common, but it's not impossible.
Sure. No, it's not impossible. It's actually a relatively common practice. One of the, right now the geothermal market's in really 2 areas. It's obviously commercial, institutional, and then residential. It's a really pretty common practice in residential to put it underneath the footprint of the building because most housing units take up most of their land mass. So if you're going to do it, you don't usually have a lot of space to put it. So it is possible. The only concern that comes into place is, one of the pieces of geothermal that does go through wear and tear is the parts that are closest to the surface, because that's where you have the thawing and freezing of the ground in our climate zone. When it's under the building, you see less of that, but it's still not And then you see groundwater, which, you know, also gets impacted even on buildings that where you don't have the freeze thaw issue. And you can't get to that. So when it's in an open field, if something happens with that, you can come in and just like you might repair a plumbing line or you might repair, you know, some other side of the infrastructure, you can come in, you know, with a backhoe and some equipment, get to that area, replace that piece, everything goes back and starts working. It becomes much harder when it's under the building. So it just becomes a serviceability and maintenance situation. Not that that's a reason not to do it, but it is something that should be taken into consideration when thinking about it and weighed against how much you get out of that portion of the project. So it'd be worth looking at as part of this effort to move project 2 forward, look at how much of that building how much of that footprint could be done with vertical wells, see what that capacity is and see how that adds to, you know, to the overall capacity of the project to get you up to that point. I think one of the points I want to make though, kind of going where the line of questioning is going, and it's an absolutely correct line of questioning, is that we are moving to a future where the air source heat pump market is getting better and better. We've seen advancements in that technology over the last couple of years to where it is now getting to efficiency, to higher efficiencies. And so as you go through, every project, I think you're going to be making these evaluations as to whether, you know, when Southfield comes up for replacement, you're going to see, all right, where is the geothermal pricing market? Where's the capacity market? Where is the efficiency market at air source heat pumps? Is now the time to replace our, you know, this boiler system and go with air source, or is this the time to go with geo? And I think it's just putting this in place and doing these kind of exercises at each of these stages, because this market is going to be developing. So you're not, I want to say, although you are losing the capacity, and that was something we just wanted to look at and make sure everybody understood, it doesn't mean that you're locked out of your future. It just means that you have to consider, do some good considered decision-making at each of these steps when you start replacing these systems, and especially these big infrastructure pieces, which could then be tied into either an air source or a water source system.
Joe, can you also speak to that? You reminded me of something that the district asked us to confirm last time, which was the lifetime of geothermal systems. And you indicated that it's 50 to 100 years, actually.
Yes,
or that nothing's failed yet. So
well, that's yeah. So
right.
This is, as an engineer, we'll know what the lifespan is when the first one fails. And right now there hasn't been one that has had a major system failure. The designs usually do consider a little bit of a buffer. So you might have a well or two that have an issue in a field, but we've not seen large scale catastrophic failures yet. And so 50 to 100 is the range, 50 to 75 for planning purposes. Most buildings are, physically planned for 50 to 75 years anyway. So in that vein, it has probably the full lifespan of buildings with renovation and turnover and the like. So I would say this is, that's the time frame you'd be looking at in terms of evaluating.
I just want to also throw out to this conversation that while there's an urgency and timeline right now for the track because of the needs that we have, and Project 2 would open up the door, as you pointed out, for that to another possibility for vertical wells. The timeline there will not be any more generous for us. Raising that part of the building will put significant stressors on our programming. Both classroom and curricular and extracurricular, and the quicker we can get anything there back online, the better.
I understand that we might have.
Just want to make sure we have that consideration. Yeah, absolutely.
Ralph, anything?
What was that whole geothermal thing again? No.
I mean, Ralph, if you'd like me to talk for another 25 minutes, I'm more than happy to. That's
Anything? Agree?
I'm stuck on what Fred said. I'm looking at, I know we have to make a decision quickly. We have to do it immediately. I'm just kind of waffling on, is it better to get something on geothermal as opposed to nothing? As opposed to a better option, which should be vertical wells, right? Do we just do it just so we can do it and get some kind of, I don't know, carbon reduction or footprint, or do we do something program on project 2 or 3 or 4 to make it more reasonable, right? Because I'm not 100% sold on this being the best option. Because it's limited. And there might be a better option for option 2 or 3, or a combination, or a hybrid. I just don't know. I'm really sold on doing this as the best option, because it's very limited what we get out of vertical wells. But I get the marketplace, I get the timing. I did the math, it's like a year and 3.5 months, so 15.5 months to drill all 1,000 of them. So we don't have that time, obviously. I don't know. I'm just really trying to liberate my head, like how best to say move forward. So any kind of feedback would help as I kind of come up with my brain. I mean, be helpful. I just don't really see this as being the best way to move forward. Just we're looking at taxpayer dollars and getting to our goal at the same time. It's just not quite convinced.
I suppose in the spirit of that question, which I think is a good one, I think it might be good for the folks we have online here to speak to, while you're working on a construction project is the time to do this, right? So in 10 years, presumably 10 years-ish, we would be in a situation where we would need to be able to, we would need to re-field, right? The turf on the backfield. But it wouldn't be the entire track. So we would have not the same opportunity we have now for the square footage there. So maybe the folks online could speak to what might be available 10 years from now, when you're redoing a turf field to go vertical at that point. I don't know if that, that might be useful as comparative.
Yeah, so 10 years from now, you could certainly do the when you're redoing the turf inside of your track, you could certainly do wells. There will probably, with the reality of construction, be some damage to your track itself in doing that kind of work. That so there would be some additional cost related to that, but you could certainly do that work. We do need to use some of this space for stormwater detention. But in talking to Joe, he felt confident that you could start the top of the wells low enough down to provide the separation distance necessary required by IDPH. The area that is most easily accessible to you, that is not necessarily hindered by timing of replacing turf, is where you would have your shot put in your discus. You do need to stay about 20 feet off of the storm lines that go up the west side of your mall. But you could get some, I want to say, we thought it was somewhere around 100 wells, 80 to 100 wells. I got to go back and look. That's off the top of my head. I have those numbers somewhere of what could fit in that area. So that's certainly, and that you would be taking shot put and discus offline. You would not be taking offline any of your track or other sports in that time frame. So I think Nicole in the track and the athletics would have a lot more flexibility in what they could do with regard to that. Does that help, Greg?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, for them.
Read any other questions from you?
No, I'm still looking at part of this.
Gina, did you have any? I have questions that might kind of feed into yours, so. So, we're here to make a today decision on something that really is, it needs to be part of a tomorrow, big plan. And I think what you've done a good job of kind of laying it out here. And so I'm going to balance between what we're committing to in our today decision versus what the big term plan is. So as I look at the data, please correct me. if we do this horizontal well, we're talking about, what is it? It cost $1.5 million incremental. What's the incremental cost?
Sorry,
Capital.
for,
The geothermal.
the upfront cost is estimated at between 4.1 and 4.6. That may be 10 to 15% high.
With incentives, net incentives.
Incentives.
I would care about total cost, not. Am I reading it correct that it's about $1.5 million net? Or am I
So the cost of the HVAC plant with the water source heat pumps is $2.45 million. If you assume 4.6 million for geothermal, that's a total investment of $7,050,000. We expect you could probably get about 2.8 million, or a little bit over that, in incentives. So an all-in investment of 4,218,000, a little over 4.2 million all in. When you subtract out 2.4 from that, it's 1.8.
Okay, so $1.8 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
And that's just a geo.
that's what the geo price tag
That's
is.
that's
It's in
right.
capital. Okay, I'm just trying to get the decision being rendered, right?
Yep.
In terms of operating costs, depending on how you look at it, and there's some benefit there, perceived, correct?
Yes.
And then the carbon, the greenhouse gas gain, and I wanted to understand this more thoroughly, because the way you calculated those numbers. Am I correct? Is it 4% is due to the horizontal? Is that right?
Actually, no matter the 4%, I should say that the greenhouse gas emissions does not depend on horizontal versus vertical. It just depends on going water source versus air source. So if you install either geothermal well field, you're going to lower the energy use relative to using an air source system. So you'll do that 4% reduction immediately. And again, that's partly because of the grid still being partly dirty. But you'll still have a net reduction from where you currently are with around that same footprint
Of 4%.
of 4%.
And then if you clarify the difference between the 4% and the I have it here. Can you pull that up? I don't know. Sure.
The 16% and the
16
36%.
and the 36.
Yeah.
Just
So
to-
the 4% is a reduction based on electrifying the building. You get that reduction. The additional change to 16% is if you were to use a portion of use the roof for renewable energy. That renewable energy will additionally clean the electric supply that's going to the building. And so therefore you're going to get an additional 12% reduction from electrifying this portion of the building. So right now you've got a mixed grid of clean and dirty. You put some renewable energy on, that means you're purchasing less dirty energy. You reduce to 16%. If you either supply the whole building with renewable energy or when the grid has cleaned, that's when you get the full reduction of 36% compared to your baseline. So that's why there's a couple of steps here. You get a reduction based on your improvement of eliminating natural gas and going to electricity. You get an improvement when you clean up a portion of that electricity, and then you get the full benefit when you clean up the entire electricity supplied to this project.
So the 4% is just, if you can humor me, 4% is a result of geothermal replacing natural gas.
Correct.
Period.
Yep.
Okay. The rest is all what kind of electricity we have.
Agreed.
So
Yep.
for this, I'm just trying to keep it focused on this discussion, this decision here, because all these other pieces, I kind of to go big, I think the challenge we face is, we have these long-term sustainability goals, and we have this gun to our head to, that the track has to be up and running by tomorrow. And those two are clashing. And so, my expectation is, one, technology is changing, and two, we can continue to evaluate what the right options are. And this is not a single one solution. It's going to be a layered in approach as we do our work. But we have a decision in front of us, which is, what do we do? Right now, we have an opportunity, right? And what's the value of that opportunity? And is it the right opportunity? Is kind of, so it's $1.8 million in capital. We'll save a little money, and we'll make a 4% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions, really because we're getting rid of gas. Which is, it's the beginning of electrification. So I think I understand that. I'm just looking at my other questions. I did have a specific question related to the materials presented, because when you talked about this gets to the ongoing energy costs, and I agree with what public comment and others have said, which is, these things are all internal. What it's going to look like in 20 years is a crapshoot, right? But I want to understand the 90 cents that was used in at least the secondary comparison. What is that, a futures view? Is that a today price? Where did 90 cents come from? Is it?
Sure. So it came from, the Energy Information Administration tracks the net cost of energy for commercial and residential customers for both natural gas and electricity. That number, 90 cents, is what the average cost for a therm of natural gas has been over the last couple of years. And it does line up with where the spot market and the futures market look like for the next couple of years. And so that is why it was kind of chosen as what is the most likely probability of what you're going to pay starting in June 2024 when you're out of this contract.
But it is a forward-looking, not present value.
It happens to be the present value, but only because the trend over the last couple of years has been pretty stable. And although it is the most recent information, obviously, since February, the natural gas prices have been a little bit more volatile. But based on the forward futures market and based on what we see in terms of the trend, that's where the 90 cents came from.
Okay. Thank you. So my last questions really focus on the decision at hand, and that is the decision that's being asked to be made is on executing the bid work for geothermal. Is that correct? Okay.
That's exactly right.
And so I want to know, one is time duration, and two, some approximation of what that is in a financial commitment. So that's bid work that will be between now and when will the bid work anticipate be done? And then how much are we estimating in costs to do that bid work?
So we are looking at that. We would, if you approved it tonight, we would begin work tomorrow, basically, on the design process. We've already got a concept down, but the engineers would start on the actual design work. We were looking at a schedule of putting that out to bid the last week of October. The bid results for the base portion of the track and field work would be brought to you in November for vote at the November board meeting. That would not include geothermal. We would be bringing the geothermal bid results to the board in at the December board meeting for approval. And then in talking with the CM and the district, and I think also we've been talking with the Park District, correct me, Greg, we're looking at specific timelines for when construction would start on the track and fields project. And that is looking to start in the spring in either April or May. There's potential to potentially start at the original commons first, but we're going to work out the details of that with the Park District. If we were to add geothermal to the track and fields project, without geothermal, we're looking at probably a completion date in October for the track and fields project. We would be able to overlap some of that work with the geothermal work. If we do horizontal wells, we would not be able to overlap it with vertical. And we are looking that it would probably add about, we would probably be looking at the end of November for a final completion of track and fields work if we add the geothermal into it. We would, from a cost perspective, I believe you're talking about fees. And we would assume that we would be doing this work in the same manner that you asked us to proceed on the track and field work, which would be on a T&M basis. We had previously proposed a 7.25% of construction cost fee percentage. We had agreed and shared with the district that we would cap our T&M cost at what that 7.25% would work out to be based on what big bids come in at for the track and field. And that's how I would assume the district would want to proceed with the geothermal portion of this work. But that's something that let us know if you want to work in a different manner on that.
But again, how much, I'm trying to take it in bites. So the next bite is, right? I mean, this is, the next decision is, do we go to bid in this work? Which means how much would we expect to spend between now and when we then would have our next decision point? Because that's,
Specifically on geothermal alone?
Correct, only on geothermal, and this is a decision strictly on, we're asking for decisions specifically on geothermal, so I'm just saying, how much are we gonna spend? It's specifically on geothermal, I don't care about anything else for this discussion.
Okay, let me do some math here right now. Okay, so to do the design documents, that's about 80% of the work and our fees. And if you take 4.6 million, multiply it, soft costs are 88% of that. And then figure out what a max at 7.25% would cap out at, and take 80% of that, that's about $235,000 maximum that you would spend for the design documents. Another 5% for actually bidding them. So that's 80%. That's that $235,000 is the cost to do the design documents prior to going out to bid. There's another 5% of whatever that would be doing the actual bidding. And that's again
12%, not 88%.
Sorry?
So it costs to be 12%, not 88%.
No. Sorry, 88% of the 4.6 takes out the 12%.
I'm gonna ask again. I want one number, right? I don't want to add three numbers. I want one number, and that's an estimate of how much when we're making a decision to spend right now. Okay, period. That's it.
Max 200, max 220,000.
220,000. Okay, and just thank you.
75% of 88% of 7.25% of cost.
Okay, so now I'm just trying to frame it up in terms of the decision. So I think that were my questions. I guess I have a question. My last question. That's a dangerous statement. My next question. I'm not going to be that. Yeah, I don't want to be said I'm not telling the truth, okay? 4%. So this is me, I'm gonna throw numbers back at you, which is we spent net $1.8 million in capital for a 4% decarbonization. Okay? And if you do the math, to decarbonize would then mean we would need to spend in total at that rate. Okay, I'm just trying to say if it's a good investment, how much money? $45 million. So that's I mean, and I'm not saying we're doing it, I mean, because we're talking about more of an a la carte of we would do some where we would buy some other, but I just did simple 1.8 divided by 0.04 is that's what it that says that's what the price tag would be on a prorated basis to say to get out of being a carbon source for this district.
If I may add
Yeah.
in, I think that far overestimates the cost, because
Okay.
that's what it costs to get an immediate 4% reduction. But if you did nothing else, if you spent no other dollars between now and 2045, you would get a 40% reduction. That 36% reduction happens regardless of whether you spend another dime on electrification or anything else. It's just a matter of how fast you need to do the reduction. So that you're getting really a 40% reduction over 20 years with spending that 1.8 million today. And then it's just a matter of what you do. So really the cost of replacing systems and doing the electrification is what it is. So you're not going to spend $45 million replacing your boiler plants over the next 20 years to get to a truly electrified building. At least not at the current cost we see for boiler replacements. You're probably in the neighborhood of $5 to $10 million for the boiler replacements. And then, again, additional monies for the geothermal, which is, you're spending 1.8 million for 500. You're going to spend another, 7 or 8 million for the rest of your geothermal capacity. If you're able to tap into it, you're looking at more like a 10 to 17,000 or 10 to 17 million than the larger number. Which is, again, over the course of 20 to 25 years, I think a much more palatable number. And truthfully, you're going to spend some of that money anyway to replace those systems as they age. So one of the key things of any electrification process is to really do the projects when you're replacing the buildings, do the projects when you're replacing the systems already. That's when you're talking about much smaller deltas. And you're looking at $1 million or 2 million per project as opposed to 40 million over that same time frame. So just to give the context of that piece of it, we presented those reductions, but they're reductions over time, and the 36% happens if you spend the 1.8 and do nothing else. By 2045, you'll have reduced that amount.
Thank you. That's the perspective I know looking for, just to kind of get a longer term vision. So just so that I can repeat, so that I think I heard what you said. Anything we're doing to electrify where we're currently burning gas is where the bigger capital is going to be. Or we need to have capital because we don't have the capacity to do it now. So we need to put something else in place. We can't just buy an alternative, go out and buy clean electricity. So that's where the dollars are going to come. And so it's this in combination with a bunch of other sources that we will need a plan on, right? Because it is about when are we replacing, and this is the discussion of when are we replacing all of our HVAC and all of our equipment over the course of the life of our building. So that's where the bigger picture comes in. So it sounds like this is somewhat of a more expensive piece, but it's just one of the pieces of the puzzle. Okay. You gonna say something or?
I was just saying to Ron, that's where his 10-year rolling plan for replacement and upgrade of building systems over time comes in.
Okay. I have exhausted my questions on this matter. So.
I think Ralph has his hand up.
Oh, thank you. You have better vision. Thank you. Ralph, you're up.
But maybe I'm looking at it and always have looked at it too simplistically, but when I ran through all these numbers, and now with the additional information I heard today, so our total delta switching systems today, choosing to do the horizontal geo, is about $2.3 million more to do to get the bid, to do all that other stuff. It's about 2.3 million. That's what we're going to pay up front. We have to make a decision now. The question is, do we leave things as they are and ignore our policy on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and wait till the next potential bite at the apple when in our 10-year rolling plan, there'll be an opportunity? Do we invest, in my mind, 2.4 million now in starting down the road of reducing our carbon footprint, generating some, although they aren't huge, some minor operational savings on an annual basis. And then as we go forward, look at the deltas available to us as technology changes and the different parts of the project are on the table to see how much more greenhouse gases we can eliminate, at what cost, and at what operational savings. So to me, the question comes down, is this worth spending about 2.4 million more than leaving things as they are to start down the road to get to the point? Joseph, did you say it would get us to about a roughly 35-40% reduction in, right? So that to me is not an insignificant reduction for, in my mind, not a significant additional delta, because I capitalized that cost over the period of time. And so in my mind, we're generating some operational savings. So I always said maybe look at it too simplistically. And I do appreciate the additional money on the cost on the bid cost tonight, because I was going to ask that question. Tom asked that question. So now we sort of have an all-in delta. And that's how I view it. And it's not going to be a perfect world, right? Because whenever we are in a position to make a capital change, whether it's because we've got to resurface a field or a building is coming past due and we've got to rip it apart or whatever, it will never be the perfect time to put in the environmentally sound thing. And so we have to evaluate it at this moment. Is this additional cost worth that amount of operational savings? Not significant, I agree, and that amount of greenhouse gas reduction, which in my mind is relatively significant. So when I look at it that way, not knowing what future technology is going to be, although I'm assuming it's going to improve, and I'm assuming there's going to be efficiencies, especially now with the Inflation Reduction Act, I do think that's going to drive even more technological advances in this area. But that's a guess. That could be wrong, right? It's a guess. In my simple way of looking at things, I think that the added cost at this juncture is the rational thing to do if in fact we are going to stick with our policy to try to begin reducing greenhouse emissions, because we're at a moment in time where we have to make some construction changes and there is an opportunity to install. It's just that simple.
Well said. Thank you. The only the next comment I have is that this is a 50 to 100-year decision. So this is not, this is not one that's gonna, it's gonna have some staying power. We are not talking about today, but would need to find, in the sequence, the discussion on how we fund this, right? Because we're talking about something that has a life that's 50 years. So that's a different discussion on that. So, but it is a 50 to 100 year. Fred will be celebrating his 100th graduation anniversary when we do the first inspection of the wells. And
Fred has already had that celebration.
Close. You're
Okay,
only a couple years
so I
behind,
think-
Bill.
Well, your comments were good in bringing it together, so I have no more. Are we ready to move on? Great. Very good. So Joe, thank you very much. And gentlemen, thank you
You're
very
welcome.
much. And
Thank you.
we'll move on.
The next topic.
Yes, please.
Now, finally, the topic we've all been waiting for. Copier paper bid results.
I vote no.
Okay.
Well, Cindy is here for a very lengthy and complex presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I'm gonna see if I can talk along the last conversation.
Please.
Any questions? This is about the paper bid. There were two people, it's an annual one. There were two that submitted bids, and the one that is Midland, which is also the state contract. This amount also too is included in our budget.
Any questions?
If you want to.
I don't have a question. I had a question that I wanted to publicly raise, which is, I do think in this bid, kind of relating to this other discussion, we need to include and measure consumption, right? And there's, when we talk about sustainability, we can decarbonize, but generate paper out the wazoo. So how do we include that in our world? So it's just as part of what we communicate, I think it's important.
Sure. Christine actually works on copy duplicating and everything, so I'm gonna just have him speak to it.
Sure, just, we do keep track of that. We have been tracking, especially since 2016, since we moved to 1-to-1. We've seen in our duplicating office about a 30% decrease in the amount of production in that area. Overall, about a 20% decrease, and that's excluding 2020 statistics. So it's just those years that were relatively low. The movements of instructional technology towards digital platforms for instruction has caused that to occur naturally. We're also putting on those productions that are higher in cost, like color printers and so forth. That's where we're putting our more restricted technology on how you access and release a print job that's there. But at the same time, we want to balance that so that we're not impacting instruction and the normal flow of that, while watching our trends to see if there's opportunities to put more restrictions on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The last item in finance is the intergovernmental agreement. First look at the intergovernmental agreement between the Park District and our district. This is relative to the fields. We've talked about this also as a board in the past, and where this is taking us. I want to bring the board's attention to just one really quick item at the end of this, in case let's take a closer look at the very end, Exhibit C in this contract shows the master use schedule that has been drafted by Nicole Upson's office in our district. This will allow us, like we said, to share space between the park, to share our field in the Park District and the district, because it's driven by the fact that our softball program will be on roofs of commons. And that the effect of that is that the Park District needs to find some way to satisfy the needs of their other programming, and this IGA allows that to happen. It also is a 25-year agreement that I'll point out, and commits the district to to providing the finances for the turf on the original common fields for the duration of the contract, but it's stated, which will probably be 3 times, 10 years, like we said, 2 times. Really. And I just want to make it clear, while that is that's definitely a significant commitment for the district, I want to point out that without a doubt, the students from this school are the primary users of that field, period. They are the ones who use that field during every single school day. When it's possible and the weather is good, our PE programming is out there 8 to 3. And now our extracurricular program will be extended all the way till 6:30 on a regular basis. So certainly that is a use that we will benefit from. So I'll open it.
Right? Yeah, I just want to, on what you talked about just now about redoing the original bill, the cost. I will say as a taxpayer, I feel that's gonna have to be redone 3 times anyways over that period of time, which will bring me up to my 75th high school route, just so you know. But so the question is, I mean, as a taxpayer, I'm gonna be paying my fair share, whether it comes out of the park district or it comes out of the school district. Now, I know there's a little difference way that they're funded. There's some user fees that the park district gains, all right, from some of their groups, but for the most part, I don't see that is a huge issue in this. And I think that our ability to utilize those fields for, I mean, primarily we're talking about our softball programming.
For the extracurricular ones.
Right, and we already use them during school day, and we use them for the field for other things.
Yes.
I just think that this has been a wonderful project for the village. I think that I really think that the village comes out, our district and the park district and our community comes out a big winner, because we're going to be able to build a track. This is kind of one of the dominoes. They've all fallen into place now. So we'll be able to build the track. We'll be able to have our programming on their fields. They'll be able to have their programming. We'll have our programming on their fields. They'll have their programming on our fields. And then we'll have more facilities for the community at large to use, because our track will be open to the public. So I want to thank, I definitely want to thank everyone involved. I know we worked hard on it. I know, Arnold's worked hard on it. I know the planning commission worked on it. Village board worked on it. And I think this is going to be a great win for our community.
Thank you.
No, yet.
No hand. Any questions? Yeah?
No.
I had 2 quick questions. Okay. One is that this is an agreement for the Ridgeland field owned by the park district, correct?
That is correct, yes.
So this does not cover Lake Street Field in any way, shape, or form.
Except for the fact that the exhibit that I was referring to earlier does talk about park district use of our property, and it will account for that. So,
But it just has activities. It just has a schedule. So I guess the question, because I was looking at, not that I want to have extra agreements, but from a reciprocation standpoint, the special use permit for which we are, the ones on the hook for adherence, has a field that then the park district will be using.
correct.
So how, from a governance standpoint and contractual basis, where is that covered, just to assure that, you know, we're all, the purpose of a contract is to outline what the responsibilities are of both parties. I'm not sure, are we protected or, are we, you know, fair that just say, hey, you're using, these are our fields, and here's what we're agreeing to on our field. I think we have those agreements, but they're not codified in any language, so I'm.
We have an existing IGA already with the park district that this does not replace. And that IGA it outlines the rules that that both parties agree to when they're using whether facilities, you know, inside our building or on our fields. So if there's something specific to this current arrangement that we could put into those future agreements, that's a possibility. But this is the purpose of bringing this to a committee right now. So if that's something that we want to add into this agreement potentially, before we bring it back in 2 weeks to govern that here, we can do that, or we can investigate whether it's right here or in a later agreement.
So I guess my ask would be, can we revisit that IGA in the context of the discussions with the special use permit? Because we want to make sure that we're being respectful to our community, right? And adhering to what we've agreed to. And is there anything in there that is supplemental to what the IGA addresses? If the IGA covers it, I'm happy, we don't need any more agreements. If the IGA is missing things that would need to be called out, then that's where we could supplement.
Yeah, I'll cover that when we bring this back to the board in 2 weeks. Okay. Thank you.
And the other question, and this is the finance question, which I think is because, as Fred mentioned, we as a district are funded by River Forest and Oak Park. You know, I just want to make sure that we're, you know, that everything is respectful. I mean, this is probably our students from both villages are covered, and that's the primary use. So I just wanted to make sure that's
for students who live in River Forest, they will be able to take advantage of everything in this agreement as students who live in Oak Park. There's no difference there whatsoever. Right. Thank you. Okay, and that's the end of the finance items.
We've covered instruction, we're on policy. So this is and we're short 2 board members, which is somewhat, you know, not what I want to do. But I'll just throw the question out there. At the last meeting, and what has been sent are the board goals, which were in draft form for this school year. And so are we ready to adopt and finalize those, or is there a need for further discussion?
I don't feel as though have we discussed them all together? I mean, we're missing people tonight. I would like for us to have a conversation with the folks who are not here.
Yeah. Then what we will need to do is put that on the agenda for the board meeting in 2 weeks. And as a discussion item, we don't vote on them. It's just us in making sure that we're in alignment. So is there anything you need from me on that?
Can you just resend them again?
Will do. Lisa, can you help with that?
Sure, no problem.
Okay.
So
future agenda items. A motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the committee of the whole is done. We're gonna flip into the special meeting real quickly.
So we stay in the same. room.
Same, right, we are.
Yeah.
Same room. Tell me when you're ready, Ed. You ready? Okay. Do it, that was quick. I call to order the special board meeting of the Oak Park and River Forest D200 School Board at 9:40 p.m. on the September the 8th, 2022, in the OPRF High School Boardroom, and ask for roll call.
Mr. Henry.
Here.
Mr. Arkin.
Here.
Mr. Martieri.
Here.
Ms. Harris. Here. Mr. Kowski.
Here. Do we have any public comment?
None.
Our first action item is the personnel report. So I move to approve the personnel recommendations, including new hires, transfers, and resignations.
Second.
Any questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Martieri.
Yes.
Mr. Arkin.
Yes.
Mr. Henry.
Yes.
Ms. Harris.
Yes.
Mr. Kowski.
Yes. I move to approve the community council members, meeting dates, and additional members for the community finance and the culture, climate, and behavior committees.
Second.
Are there any questions?
Mr. Arkin.
Yes.
Mr. Henry.
Yes.
Ms. Harris.
Yes.
Mr. Martieri.
Yes.
Mr. Kowski.
Yes. I move to approve the administrator and non-licensed director contracts for the 2022 through 2023 school year.
Second.
You're on it. I love it. You're good. Are there any questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Henry.
Yes.
Mr. Arkin.
Yes.
Ms. Harris.
Yes.
Mr. Martieri.
Yep.
Mr. Kowski.
Yes. And our last item is I move to approve the sustainable energy use and decarbonization
To go out to bid for that.
to go to bid.
Second.
Okay, are there any discussions on this at this time?
I just want to make sure we're talking about going out to bid on the geothermal.
Yes, so the vote, the vote here is to approve that our architectural firm complete the bid documents for a value that was approximated at $220,000. That will get us to bid a horizontal geothermal plan that's covered. So any discussion?
Just a real quick question, so I can have confirmation. So we do geothermal, we have to replace our pumps, right? System to be electric, we currently have gas. So geothermal doesn't really work unless we have a new system, is that correct?
Right.
So if we don't do project two, it's kind of move, even doing geothermal.
No, you could use it in other parts of the building.
You would have to replace other equipment in your building to tie it into in future.
Is it the
You
same?
don't currently have any, don't currently have any heat pumps in your building that it would tie into. If you don't do project two, you would need to replace other equipment with heat pumps.
Same percentages would reflect.
Yeah, can you clarify too, that because that is, it would result in the same 4% reduction in GHG that was shown in that chart in the memo, correct?
Yes, that's my understanding.
So either way, geothermal will help us, the carbon footprint also get us to more electric equipment. just not necessarily, the project two can and may not happen, I know we'll get there. But just want to make sure we're being prudent when it's going to be dollars, that it's not just going to be tied about stealing, right? It is important to state for the record, so committee hears it, so I'm not here, that was swear too, so. Then it does it for me, that's all they have.
Other comments? I'll just say, I think Ralph kind of brought it together, in terms of, there's a lot of data here. But this is really a, step one of a long-term commitment towards electrification. And it's gonna be a bunch of different pieces. And it has a long lifespan, but, it's in support of what we need to do from an energy standpoint, and the economics will be spread over a long period of time. So for that reason, I will support it. We can take a roll call. See, give me a second. Gina's been the second. She's been the second. I was looking at you, Gina.
I read it.
She's on it.
Already.
She's on it. So, may we please have a roll call?
Mr. Arkin,
Yes.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Mr. Martieri,
Yes.
Ms. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Cosby.
Yes.
Motion to adjourn?
All in favor?
All right.
All opposed? Thank you.